The final days of World War II were some of the most intense and chaotic in history. Across Europe, cities were in ruins. Streets were filled with rubble, buildings burned, and countless lives had been lost. The sounds of fighting had begun to fade, but fear and uncertainty remained. People didn't know if they would survive or what the days ahead would bring. We explained this video in 3 parts. Part 1: The final days of war approaching. By early 1945, the Allies were advancing from the west and Soviet forces were pushing from the east. Germany, which had caused so much destruction, was collapsing. Soldiers and civilians faced hunger, fear, and confusion. No one knew if the war's end would bring freedom or more suffering. In Hitler's bunker, the leaders of Nazi Germany clung to the idea that they could still win. They gave orders for desperate attacks, even though defeat was certain. In the cities, civilians struggled to survive amid constant bombing and lack of food. Everyday life had become a fight just to stay alive. But even in these dark times, acts of courage and kindness happened. Ordinary people risked their lives to help others. They hid strangers, shared food, and protected children. These small acts of bravery were often forgotten in the larger story of the war, but they saved lives. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet army brought both relief and terror. Many people were freed from Nazi rule, but reprisals and violence followed. Soldiers and civilians had to navigate a world where survival was never guaranteed. Inside Germany, the war's collapse caused chaos for soldiers and families. Soldiers deserted or disobeyed orders to protect themselves. Families searched for food and safety, hiding from danger wherever they could. The ordinary people's struggle to survive was as dramatic as the battles themselves. Allied leaders far away were making decisions that would affect millions. Bombing campaigns, battles, and occupation plans all carried huge consequences, but for the people on the ground, these decisions were distant. Their main concern was simply staying alive. Even as the world seemed to fall apart, small stories of hope persisted. In one town, a mother reunited with her children after months apart. In another, families hid from danger, protecting themselves in silence. These stories show the courage and determination of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. As May 1945 approached, tension was at its peak. People waited anxiously for soldiers to arrive, hoping for safety but fearing more violence. Armies prepared for surrender while soldiers and civilians remembered the horrors they had witnessed. Even in these last days, propaganda and rumors were everywhere. Leaders tried to control the story of the war's end. Ordinary people had to figure out what was true, making decisions that could mean life or death. Many stories from this time were never told. Prisoners of war, civilians trapped in dangerous areas, and soldiers caught in chaos lived and died quietly. These untold stories show the human cost of the war's final days. When the war finally ended, Europe was forever changed. Cities would rebuild, countries would recover, and history would be written. But the experiences of ordinary people remind us that the end of a war is not just about battles or leaders. It is about the lives of millions of people, each facing fear, hope, and survival in their own way. Part 2: Surrender and Immediate Aftermath. As April 1945 came to an end, the war in Europe was nearing its conclusion. German cities were surrounded by Allied forces and the Nazi regime was collapsing. Soldiers and civilians could see that the fighting would soon be over, but for many, peace still felt distant. In Berlin, Hitler's death marked the end of Nazi leadership. Chaos followed as German officers struggled to follow orders, surrender, or escape. Many soldiers didn't know what would happen next. Some continued fighting out of fear, loyalty, or confusion. Others chose to surrender, hoping to survive and see the end of the war. Across Europe, the Allies accepted surrenders in stages. Soldiers laid down their weapons and towns were slowly freed from occupation. The relief of liberation came with a heavy cost. Cities were destroyed, homes were gone, and millions of people had lost everything. For survivors, life had changed forever. Among civilians, survival was still the main concern. Many had endured hunger, disease, and the constant threat of violence. Families were reunited when possible, but others never found their loved ones. Communities tried to rebuild, often in the midst of ruins. In this chaos, ordinary people showed extraordinary strength, finding ways to care for one another and start again. Prisoners of war were freed, but their experiences often remained unknown. Some had spent years in harsh camps working under brutal conditions. Many were too weak to return home immediately and faced long journeys to safety. Their stories were filled with pain, endurance, and quiet acts of courage that history often overlooked. In Germany, civilians faced occupation by the Allies. The experience was difficult and sometimes frightening. People had to adjust to new authorities, new rules, and the realization that the world they had known was gone. Yet, even in these uncertain times, communities began to rebuild, schools reopened, and families tried to regain a sense of normal life. In liberated countries, people celebrated freedom but also mourned their losses. Cities were in ruins, towns were emptied of the living, and memories of violence were everywhere. Survivors faced the challenge of creating a new life while remembering what had been lost. These moments, both sorrowful and hopeful, shaped the post-war world. Even after the surrender, not all dangers had passed. Landmines, unexploded bombs, and damaged infrastructure made travel and rebuilding dangerous. Disease spread in crowded conditions and food shortages continued for months. Survival required resilience, resourcefulness, and patience. The stories of ordinary people during this time reveal the true human cost of war. Mothers reunited with children, strangers helped one another, and communities worked together to survive. These stories remind us that the end of the war was not just about battles or leaders, it was about people living through extraordinary circumstances. As Europe slowly recovered, the lessons of the war became clear. The destruction had been immense, but the courage and resilience of ordinary people offered hope. These stories, though often hidden in history books, show that even in the darkest times, humanity can endure. By the summer of 1945, Europe began a slow path toward rebuilding. Governments worked to restore order, refugees returned home, and survivors began to tell their stories. The world had witnessed the end of one of history's deadliest conflicts. But the experiences of those who lived through it would continue to shape generations. The final days of World War II were not just about military victories or political decisions, they were about the countless individuals who faced fear, loss, and hope. Their stories, untold for so long, give us a deeper understanding of the war's true impact on humanity. Part 3: Rebuilding and Long-Term Consequences. With the surrender of Germany in May 1945, Europe faced a new challenge: rebuilding a continent torn apart by years of war. Cities lay in ruins, transportation networks were destroyed, and millions of people were displaced. Families returned to homes that no longer existed, and communities had to find ways to start over from nothing. The aftermath of the war was not just physical, it was emotional and psychological. Survivors carried the weight of what they had witnessed. Children who had known only fear and hunger learned to live in a world of uncertainty. Adults struggled with grief for lost loved ones, guilt over choices they had made, and the trauma of war. These invisible wounds would shape lives for decades. Across Europe, refugees and displaced people faced enormous challenges. Many had lost everything: homes, possessions, and family. Governments and relief organizations worked to provide food, shelter, and medical care, but resources were limited. In many cases, ordinary people showed extraordinary generosity, taking in strangers or sharing what little they had. These small acts of humanity helped rebuild hope in a shattered world. Countries also faced the difficult task of addressing the crimes of the war. Trials were held to bring leaders and perpetrators to justice. Communities had to confront painful truths about collaboration, betrayal, and the consequences of ideology. For survivors, justice was both necessary and complicated. It could never fully erase the suffering they had endured. In Germany, life slowly returned to a fragile normal. Children went back to school, shops reopened, and families worked to recover from the devastation. Yet the scars of the war remained visible in the rubble of cities, in the memories of survivors, and in the stories that were passed down quietly from generation to generation. Throughout Europe, ordinary people rebuilt their lives with resilience and determination. Farmers returned to their fields, workers rebuilt factories, and communities created new institutions. Life was difficult, but people adapted. Slowly, hope returned, and with it, the sense that a brighter future was possible. The war's end also brought lasting lessons. Societies realized the cost of hatred and the value of human life. Survivors' stories, once hidden or ignored, became crucial reminders of what can happen when power and ideology override compassion. These personal histories continue to teach us about courage, endurance, and the importance of remembering the past. Even decades later, the final days of World War II continue to resonate. The experiences of ordinary people, those who survived bombings, starvation, displacement, and fear, offer powerful insights into the human spirit. Their resilience, compassion, and determination shaped not only the post-war recovery but also the world we live in today. The story of the war's final days is not only about the surrender of armies or the fall of governments. It is about people, men, women, and children facing unimaginable challenges and finding ways to survive. Their courage reminds us that even in the darkest times, hope can endure, humanity can prevail, and life can continue. As Europe rebuilt and the world moved forward, the memories of these final days became part of a shared history. They are a reminder of both the horrors and the heroism of humanity, and of the enduring power of ordinary people to shape extraordinary events. The end of World War II marked a new beginning, not just for nations but for the countless individuals whose lives had been changed forever. Their stories, once hidden, now stand as a testament to the strength, resilience, and spirit of humanity in the face of unimaginable adversity. Thank you for watching. If you want to uncover more untold stories from history, subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with your friends, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.